mysterious, intriguing, and often illuminating. These are worldwide folklore tales. Welcome to the first installment of Worldwide Folklore Tales. Join us as we travel to the ridings of Yorkshire in England, through the foggy moors and deep into the dense woods. Tonight's tale, Melch Dick, comes from F.W. Moorman's story More Tales of the Ridings, and has been adapted by the author Librarian. It is known that the ancient woodland creature known as Melch Dick guards against folks from picking unripe hazelnuts. Let's follow little Doed into the woods, where he will meet this mysterious Melch Dick. What I am going to tell you now is what I have heard my mother say scores of times, so you'll know it's true. It was the back end of the year, and the lads had gone into the woods to gather hazelnuts and acorns. There were 2 or 3 big lads amongst them, but most were little uns, and one was lame in the leg. They called him Doed. Doed of Billy's of Clay Pit Lane. The lads had gotten a load of nuts, and they set off home as fast as they could go, as it was getting a bit dusky in the wood. But little Doed could not keep up with the other lads on account of his dodgy leg. The lads kept hollering back to him to look sharp and to get a shift on, or else he would get left behind. So Doed hobbled along as fast as he was able, but he could not keep up with the other lads, try as he might. All the time, the light was slowly fading. At long length, Doed thought he saw one of the lads waiting for him under an oak tree. When he drew closer, he realized it was someone that he had never clapped eyes on before. This person was no bigger than Doed, but it was hard to tell how old he was. And he had a weird smell about him, as though he had taken the essence of all the trees from the wood and smeared them all over his body. But what capped it all off were the clothes the man was dressed in, covered in green moss, and on his head was a cap of red fur. Well, when Doed saw him, he was a bit afraid, but the lad looked at him in a friendly way and said, "Now then, Doed, where are you going?" I'm off home," said Doed, and his teeth started to chatter with fright. "Well, I'm going your way," said the lad. "So, if you like, you can come along with me. You'll not recognize me, but I can tell who you are by the way you favor your mother. You'll have heard tell of your Uncle Ned Bowker that lives over by Sally Abbey? He's my father, so I reckon we're cousins." Now, Doed had heard his mother tell him about his Uncle Ned, so he calmed down a little, but still was not too keen on the look of this lad. They carried on talking, however, and Doed let on that he was keen on squirrels. You see, he loved to collect animals and kept linnets and magpies in cages, and also a box full of hedgehogs. He had never caught a squirrel. They were too quick for him, and he wanted one more than anything in the world. When Melch Dick heard this, for of course the lad under the oak tree was Melch Dick himself, he said that if Doed came with him, he would soon give the boy what he wanted. He had been climbing trees and caught a squirrel, putting it in the basket he carried his dinner in. Well, little Doed hardly knew what to do. It was getting late, and there was something about this lad that worried him. But then he thought of the squirrel and how much he wanted one. So he told Melch Dick that he would go with to fetch the squirrel. But he must not stop long, or else folks would know that he had lost his way, and they would surely come looking for him. When Melch Dick heard him say that he would come along, his eyes glistened, and he set off through the wood, with Doed following behind. The wood was full of great oak trees, with birch set amongst them that were just beginning to change colour. After a while, they got to a pool in the middle of the wood. It was no bigger than a duck pond, but the water was deep, and all around the pond was a ring of aspen trees, with their boughs hanging over the water. The sky had been overcast earlier, but the wind had cleared the clouds. The moon was shining in a way that lit up the trees and made the water glisten like silver. Melch Dick settled down by the water, and Doed did the same. They started talking again, with Doed asking him why he was covered in green moss.
"If you were to climb trees the same way as I have,"
answered Melch Dick,
"then you'd be covered with moss too, I'd say. Why do you wear a cap of red fur?" "Why shouldn't I wear a fur cap? I'd like to know. My mother makes them from squirrel skins, and they're fearfully warm in winter."
When little Doed heard mention of squirrels again, it reminded him to ask for the squirrel in the basket.
"Wait a while,"
said Melch Dick,
"and I'll show you more squirrels than you've ever seen in your life."
With that, Melch Dick took a penny whistle out of his pocket, obviously made by himself, whittled from a slim ash branch. He put it to his mouth and blew 2 or 3 notes, and sure enough, there was some noise from nearby. In no time at all, 6 squirrels were sitting on the branches of the aspens. When Doed saw the squirrels in the moonlight, he was beside himself with excitement. He looked at them, and they looked at him, and their eyes were as bright as glowworms. All the while, Melch Dick played his whistle, and the squirrels kept coming through the trees. You could hardly see the branches for the squirrels now. It was as though all the squirrels in the forest had heard the tune and been forced to follow the sound. They made no noise or fuss, but sat down on the branches, pricked up their ears, cocked their tails over their backs, and kept their eyes fixed on Melch Dick. Well, once Melch Dick decided he had gathered enough squirrels, he changed his tune, and it was a rough tune too. Sometimes it was like the howling of the wind down a chimney, sometimes like the curlews and lapwings upon the moors. But when the squirrels heard the tune, they lined up 12 to a branch. They jumped from tree to tree, right around the pool, with their tails set straight out behind them. They were that close together, it was like a great coil of rope spinning around the water. All the time, their faces turned to Melch Dick, and their eyes were blazing like burning coals. Round and round they went, with little Doed just holding his breath and watching them. He had seen horses riding around a ring at a fair, but that was nothing compared to the squirrels spinning around the pool. After a while, Doed thought that Melch Dick would stop playing, but he did nothing of the sort. Instead, he played ever faster, keeping one eye on the squirrels and one eye on little Doed. The faster he played, the faster the squirrels jumped, and before long, the tune was more like a shriek than a dance tune. Doed had heard nothing like it before. It was as though all the devils in hell had been set loose and were being blown through the sky above. It was a strange sound, and a strange sight too, and little Doed's teeth started chattering, and every limb on his body was shaking like the aspen leaves on the trees around the pool. Doed was scared half to death, but for all of that, he could not take his eyes off the squirrels. They had bewitched him. He put his hand to his head, and it felt as though he was spinning around and around himself. Now that was what Melch Dick wanted, and why he set the squirrels going. He could not do anything to Doed while he was master of his own senses. But if Doed was to get giddy enough to drift off into a daydream, then sure enough, Melch Dick would have him in his power. Melch Dick would be able to turn him into a squirrel, as he had done to so many lads and lasses before. As Doed felt his head getting woolly, thinking he was falling asleep and unsure where he was anymore, he decided he must be lying in bed at home, drifting off to sleep without saying his prayers. You see, his mother had taught him a prayer to say every night before going to bed. Doed tried to say his prayer, but could not remember the words. That made him uneasy, as he was a good lad, and it worried him that he had forgot the words. All he could call to mind was something he had heard the lads and lasses say on their way home from school. He reckoned it was more a bit of fun than a prayer, but he started to say anyway, as loud as he could.
Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, bless the bed that I lay on.
He had no sooner said the words when all of a sudden Melch Dick stopped playing. The squirrels stopped jumping. The bats stopped flying over the pool. The moon hid behind a great thundercloud, and the wood and the water were as black as a boot. Then there came a scuffling and a shrieking all over the wood. The squirrels started spitting and swearing like mad. The wind yowled, and there were all sorts of strange noises overhead. After a minute of chaos, the moon came clear of the cloud, and Doed looked around. There was nothing to see. Melch Dick was no longer next to him, and there was not a squirrel left in the trees. All he could see were the aspen leaves blowing in the wind, and tiny waves in the pond lapping against the bank. Doed was well nigh starved to death with cold and hunger, and the poor lad started crying as though his heart would break. He soon had enough sense to start shouting for help, and before long there came an answer. His father and the lads from the village had been looking for him all over the wood. As soon as they found him, they took him home and put him to bed. It was a long while before Doed was better, and he never set foot in the wood again, not without a bit of witchwood in his pocket, cut from a rowan tree on St. Helen's Day.